The cold hit Marcus Cole like a hammer to the chest, and he gasped as his body jerked forward in the cryopodus. Lungs burned with frozen air, and his muscles screamed in protest as he tried to move limbs that had not worked in what felt like forever. Pod's glass lid had already retracted and emergency lights painted, everything in a sickly red glow that pulsed like a dying heartbeat. Marcus tumbled out of the pod, and his naked body slammed against the metal floor, and the shock of the cold deck against his bare skin made him cry out. He lay there shaking and trying to remember where he was and who he was and why everything felt so terribly wrong. Memories came back in fragments like pieces of a broken mirror. He was Chief Engineer Marcus Cole of the Deep Space Research Vessel Endurance, and they had been traveling to the Kepler system, and he had gone into cryosleep expecting to wake up in 18 months, but something was wrong. The ship was dark, except for those pulsing emergency lights, and the familiar hum of the engines was gone and replaced by a deep silence that pressed against his ears like water. Marcus pushed himself up on trembling arms and looked around the cryobay. 100 pods lined the walls in neat rows, and every single one of them was open and empty. His crewmates were gone. "Vera," he called out, and his voice cracked from disuse. Ship's artificial intelligence did not respond in her usual calm tone, and instead the speakers crackled with static and broken words. Mar-Cuss-Wake-Danger-7-years- they came. 7 years. The words hit him harder than the cold, and he staggered to the nearest console and wiped frost from the screen with his bare hand. The internal chronometer confirmed what Vera had tried to tell him, and the date showed that he had been asleep not for 18 months, but for 7 years and 3 months and 12 days. That was impossible. Cryopods were designed to keep passengers in suspension indefinitely, but the journey should have taken less than 2 years, and something had gone terribly wrong. Marcus looked down at his naked body and realized he needed to focus on survival before he could solve any mysteries. The emergency locker near the door had been torn open, and most of the supplies were gone, but he found a thermal blanket that he wrapped around himself like a crude toga. It was not much, but it was better than nothing. As he moved toward the door, he noticed something on the wall that made him stop. Cold, strange symbols had been carved into the metal, and they glowed with a faint blue light that seemed to pulse in rhythm with his own heartbeat. Marcus did not recognize the language, and yet, somewhere deep in his mind, he felt like he should understand what it meant. The symbols seemed to whisper to him in a voice that was not quite sound, and the message was simple. "You were chosen." A shudder ran through him that had nothing to do with the cold. Marcus found a maintenance kit near the engineering station and armed himself with the heaviest wrench he could find, and it was not much of a weapon, but holding it made him feel slightly less helpless. The corridors of the Endurance were transformed where there had once been clean white walls and orderly equipment. There was now something organic and alive, and a strange bioluminescent residue coated every surface and pulsed with soft light. The ship looked like it had been swallowed by some massive creature and was slowly being digested. Marcus moved carefully through the passages he had once known so well, and every shadow seemed to hide something watching and waiting. Checked each section methodically. The bridge was empty, and the controls were covered in that same organic growth. The crew quarters were abandoned, and personal belongings were scattered across the floors, as if everyone had left in a hurry. The medical bay was worse because the walls were covered in strange cocoon-like structures that pulsed with inner light. Marcus did not want to know what was inside them. He made his way toward the observation deck, hoping to see stars and get some sense of where the ship had drifted in 7 years. What he saw through the windows made him sink to his knees. They were not in open space. The Endurance hung suspended inside something vast and alive, and organic walls stretched as far as he could see in every direction, and distant lights pulsed in patterns that suggested intelligence. The ship had been swallowed. A Sound from behind made Marcus spin around and raise his wrench. The wall itself seemed to ripple and shift, and a face emerged from the organic matter that was not quite human and not quite anything else he had ever seen. It spoke in a voice that echoed inside his skull rather than through his ears. "You are awake, and that is good because we need you, Marcus Cole." Marcus backed away until he hit the window, and his heart pounded so hard he thought it might burst. "What are you?" he demanded. "What did you do to my crew?" The face regarded him with something that might have been curiosity or hunger or both. "We are the Vethkai, and we have traveled between stars for longer than your species has existed, and your crew served their purpose, but you are different." "Different how?" "You cannot be consumed, and your mind resists us in ways we have never encountered, and that makes you valuable." Marcus gripped his wrench tighter and refused to let the fear overwhelm him. "Where is my crew?" "They are part of us now, and their memories and knowledge fuel our journey, and this is how we survive." The horror of it washed over. Marcus and 200 people were dead and absorbed by these creatures, and he was the only one left. "Why me?" he asked. "Why did you spare me?" The Vethkai face seemed to smile, but there was no warmth in it. "Because something is coming, and something that even we fear, and we have watched your species from afar, and we know what you are, even if you do not." The ship shuddered beneath Marcus's feet, and somewhere in the distance something massive moved. "What is coming?" he asked. "The hollow, and they consume everything, and they cannot be stopped, and they cannot be reasoned with, but they can be hurt by those who resist their touch." The face leaned closer, and its eyes burned with an emotion Marcus finally recognized. It was fear. You were not spared out of mercy, Marcus Cole, and you were spared because you may be the only thing in this galaxy that can hurt. What is coming for us all? Marcus stood alone and naked, except for a thermal blanket and armed with nothing but a wrench, and he had just learned that his crew was dead and monsters needed his help, and something worse was on its way. He should have been terrified, and he was, but beneath the fear something else stirred. It was anger. These creatures had taken everything from him, and now they expected him to save them. Marcus looked at the Vethkai face and made a decision. "Tell me everything," he said, "and then we will see about saving anyone." The darkness around him pulsed, and somewhere in the depths of the living ship the hollow drew closer, and Marcus Cole began his journey from engineer to something the galaxy had never seen before. Marcus followed the Vethkai deeper into the transformed ship, and every step took him further from anything that resembled the endurance he remembered. The organic walls pulsed with soft light and seemed to breathe around him, and he could feel vibrations through his bare feet that matched no rhythm he recognized. Thermal blanket wrapped around his body was thin protection against both the cold and the strangeness, but Marcus refused to show weakness. The Vethkai guide moved through the walls themselves, and its face appearing and disappearing as it led him through corridors that twisted in ways that should have been impossible. "You have questions," the creature said inside his mind. "We will answer what we can. Start with how." "You took my ship," Marcus said. "Your vessel entered a region of space. We had seeded with spores, and the spores attached to the hull and began their work, and by the time your crew realized something was wrong, we had already begun the bonding process." Marcus thought of his friends and colleagues and the people he had laughed with and worked beside, and now they were nothing but fuel for these parasites. "The bonding process," he repeated, and his voice was flat. "You mean you ate them?" "Consumed is more accurate, and their physical forms provided nutrients, while their consciousness provided something more valuable, which is what? Memory and knowledge and experience. And we do not create as your species does, and we absorb and learn and grow, and your crew knew things about engineering and medicine and art that we had never encountered." The thought made Marcus sick, but he forced himself to keep walking and keep listening. "Why could you not consume me?" The Vethkai was silent for a moment, and when it spoke again, there was something like wonder in its mental voice. We tried, and when we attempted to bond with your consciousness, we encountered something we had never felt before. And it was like touching fire and your mind burned us. I do not understand. Neither do we entirely, and we searched the memories of your crewmates for answers, and we found records of your medical history. And when you were a child, you received an experimental vaccine for a disease that no longer exists. Marcus remembered the shots and the weeks of fever that followed, and his parents had been part of a medical trial, and he had always assumed the vaccine was just another childhood immunization. That vaccine changed you, the Vethkai continued. It altered your neural chemistry in ways that make you resistant to psychic intrusion, and to us, and to the Hollow. They emerged into a vast chamber that must have been the cargo hold once, but now it looked like the inside of a living heart. Organic pillars stretched from floor to ceiling, and each one pulsed with inner light, and Marcus realized with horror that he could see shapes inside them, human shapes. Your crew, the Vethkai said. What remains of their physical forms, and they feel no pain, and they dream forever within us. Marcus wanted to scream, and wanted to smash everything with his wrench, and wanted to burn this entire nightmare to ash, but he controlled himself, because anger without purpose was useless, and he needed information. Tell me about the Hollow, he said. The entire chamber seemed to shudder, and the lights dimmed, and Marcus felt fear radiating from the Vethkai like heat from a fire. The Hollow are ancient and perhaps as old as the universe itself, and they exist partially outside normal space, and they feed on consciousness, like you do. No, and we consume to survive, but the Hollow consume because it is their nature, and they cannot stop, and they have destroyed civilizations beyond counting and species that built wonders you cannot imagine, and they are coming here. They are always coming, and they spread across the galaxy like a plague, and wherever thinking beings exist, the Hollow eventually find them. Marcus felt the weight of those words settle on his shoulders, and an entire galaxy of intelligent life was being hunted by something that could not be stopped. Why do you think I can hurt them? The Vethkai guided him to a section of wall that became transparent, and through it Marcus could see the stars and something else here. Distant point of light that was not a star. That is a human colony, the Vethkai said. One of several that have survived the Hollow's attention, and we have watched them for decades. Marcus stared at the light, and his heart ached with longing, and other humans were out there and living and fighting. They survive because of what you are, and the Hollow cannot easily consume human minds, and your species resist them in ways no other life form has ever managed. The vaccine, Marcus said. No, and the vaccine merely enhanced what was already there. And your entire species carries the resistance within you, and it is written into your genetic code and buried in what your scientists call junk. Theanem, that is not possible. It is more than possible, and it is designed. And millions of years ago something engineered your ancestors, and something gave you weapons against psychic predation that you never knew you possessed. Marcus thought about all the strange things humans had always believed, and the myths about mental powers, and the stories of people who could resist possession and control maybe. Those stories had a basis in something real. You said you need me, Marcus said. What exactly do you expect me to do? The Hollow fear you, and not just you, but all humans, and we need you to help us reach a sanctuary where survivors from many species have gathered, and in exchange, we will give you the locations of every human colony we know. And if I refuse, then we will wait here until the Hollow find us, and they will consume us. And then they will find those colonies anyway. And your choice is not between helping us or not, and your choice is between fighting or surrendering. Marcus looked at the distant light of the human colony, and thought about the crew he had lost, and the years that had been stolen from him. The Vethkai had taken everything from him, and now they were asking him to save them. It should have been an easy decision to refuse and to let these monsters face the consequences of their parasitic existence. But the Hollow would not stop with the Vethkai. And they would keep spreading and keep consuming. And eventually, they would find Earth and every human everywhere. Marcus was not a soldier, and he was not a hero. And he was an engineer who had woken up naked and alone in a nightmare. But he was also human, and humans did not surrender. "Show me how to fight them," he said. The Vethkai's fear seemed to lessen slightly, and something like hope flickered in its mental voice. "You will need training, and we can teach you to focus your resistance and to project it outward. And when the Hollow Scouts come, you will show them what a human can do. When they come, soon, and they have already detected this vessel, and they are curious about what they sense aboard. They sense me. Yes, and your resistance shines like a beacon to them, and they have never encountered anything like you, and they will come to investigate." Marcus gripped his wrench and looked around the organic chamber that had once been his ship. He was one man with no weapons and no armor and no training, and he was facing an enemy that had destroyed civilizations, but he was human, and somewhere out there other humans were fighting and surviving and waiting. He would not let them down. "Then let us get started," Marcus said, "because when they come, I want to be ready." The Vethkai began to teach him, and in the depths of space, the Hollow turned their attention toward the small ship that carried something they had never expected to find: a human who was not afraid to fight back. 3 weeks passed inside the living ship, and Marcus Cole transformed from a confused survivor into something new. The Vethkai taught him things about his own mind that no human had ever known, and he learned that the resistance he carried was not passive but could be focused and directed and turned into a weapon. Each day, he practiced in the organic chamber that had become his training ground, and the Vethkai would send tendrils of psychic energy toward him, and each day he pushed back harder. At first, he could only defend himself, and his mind would form barriers that the Vethkai could not penetrate. Then he learned to project and to send his resistance outward like a wave. The first time he struck back, the entire chamber shuddered, and the Vethkai screamed in a frequency that made the walls ripple. "Enough," the creature gasped. "You learned faster than we anticipated." Marcus lowered his hands and felt the strange energy humming inside his skull, and it was like nothing he had ever experienced, and yet it felt natural and right. "How did I do that?" he asked. "Your species calls it many things, and willpower, and determination and stubbornness, and you have the ability to impose your reality onto the psychic plane, and where other species submit to mental pressure, you push back, and the Hollow cannot handle that. The Hollow have never encountered a species that pushes back, and they consume minds that are open to them. And your mind is not open, and when you focus it, becomes a blade that can cut them." Marcus thought about this as he walked through the ship that had become half familiar and half alien, and found better clothing in a storage compartment the Vethkai had not absorbed, and he wore a simple jumpsuit. Now, instead of the thermal blankets, it was a small thing, but it made him feel more human. VR's fragmented consciousness had stabilized somewhat, and the AI could speak in complete sentences now, though her voice still crackled with damage. "Marcus," she said as he entered the bridge, "I have been analyzing the data the Vethkai provided about the Hollow. What did you find?" "They are fascinating from a purely scientific perspective, and they exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and their physical forms in our reality are just projections of something much larger." "That sounds terrifying." "It is, but it also explains why your resistance works, and when you focus your mind, you anchor reality around yourself, and the Hollow cannot maintain their projections and stabilize space, and they become vulnerable." Marcus stared at the view screen that showed the organic walls surrounding the ship. "So I make them solid," he said. "I force them to play by our rules, precisely, and in their true form, they are nearly invincible, but when forced into physical reality, they can be hurt, and they can be killed." The Vethkai face emerged from the wall nearby. "A scout ship approaches," it said. "The Hollow have sent investigators to determine what we carry." Marcus felt a cold knot form in his stomach, but he pushed the fear aside and let the calm focus of his training take over. How long until they arrive? Hours only, and we must prepare. I am ready. No, and you are not, and you have trained against us, but we are gentle compared to the Hollow, and their touch is corruption itself. And if you waver for even a moment, they will tear your mind apart. Marcus thought about the 200 people who had died on this ship and the colonies of humans fighting to survive, and the unknown creators who had given his species the tools to resist. He would not waver. Show me to the airlock, he said. I want to meet them personally. The Vethkai seemed surprised, and the emotion rippled through the walls around them. You wish to face them directly, and that is either very brave or very foolish. Probably both, but humans are good at that. Marcus made his way to the main airlock, and the organic growth parted before him as if the ship itself recognized his authority. Now he stood before the massive doors and waited, and Vera tracked the approaching vessel on what remained of the sensors. Contact in 10 minutes, she reported. The Hollow ship is small and likely carrying only a few scouts. A few is enough to destroy most species, the Vethkai said. They will try to break you quickly, and do not let them. Marcus closed his eyes and focused on the energy inside him, and he thought about Earth and about the blue skies and green forests he had not seen in over 7 years. He thought about his parents and his friends and every human who had ever lived and died and fought for something better. The resistance swelled inside him like a tide, and he felt it spreading outward and filling the space around him with something solid and real. The airlock doors began to open, and cold, void air rushed in, and then the Hollow arrived. They were nothing like Marcus had imagined, and they were worse. Reality itself seemed to bend around them, and their forms shifted constantly. In one moment they looked like geometric shapes, and the next like twisted humanoid figures, and the next like nothing at all. Their presence was a pressure against his mind, and it was like standing beneath a waterfall of darkness, and despair. Voices whispered in his head, and they promised peace and rest, and an end to all struggle, and they offered oblivion wrapped in velvet. Marcus felt his resistance flicker, and for a terrible moment he almost surrendered. Then he remembered the cocoons in the cargo hold, and the faces of his friends trapped forever in the Vethkai's organic prison. These things wanted to do worse. No, he said aloud, and his voice was steady. The resistance exploded outward, and the Hollow scouts screamed as reality crashed into them like a hammer. Their shifting forms solidified against their will, and Marcus could see them clearly now, and they were pale and wrong, and their bodies were full of angles that should not exist, but they were solid, and solid things could be hurt. Marcus charged forward, and his fist connected with the nearest Hollow, and the creature shrieked and fell back. Its form flickered and tried to become immaterial again, but Marcus focused harder and kept it trapped in physical reality. The other scouts attacked, and their mental assault hit him like a wall of noise, but he pushed through it and kept fighting. He was not graceful, and he was not skilled, and he was an engineer fighting with his fists against cosmic horrors. But he was winning. The Vethkai watched in stunned silence as Marcus Cole drove the Hollow scouts back toward their ship, and his resistance burned around him like visible fire. Scouts retreated, and their mission had failed, and they carried back a message to their collective. There was something new in the galaxy, and something that could hurt them, and something they did not understand. The Hollow ship fled. Marcus collapsed against the airlock wall, and his body shook with exhaustion, and his mind felt scraped raw, but he was alive, and he had won. Impossible, the Vethkai whispered. No single being has ever driven back the Hollow. Marcus looked at the stars through the still-open airlock doors. I told you, he said. Humans do not surrender, and somewhere in the depths of space, the Hollow turned their full attention toward the small ship and its impossible passenger. The war had just begun. The Hollow came in force 3 days after their scouts fled, and they came with enough power to consume entire worlds. Marcus stood on the bridge of the transformed endurance and watched the view screen with cold determination as space itself seemed. The tear-open ships emerged from the darkness, but they were not ships in any normal sense, and they were living nightmares given form and structures of impossible geometry that hurt the eyes to look at directly. 17 vessels, Vera reported, each. One carries enough hollow entities to consume a populated planet. They send an armada for one human, the Vethkai said, and there was something like dark humor in its mental voice. You should feel honored. I feel tired, Marcus admitted, but tired has never stopped a human from fighting. The hollow fleet surrounded the Endurance, and for a long moment, nothing happened. Then, the walls began to scream. The Vethkai collective writhed in agony as the Hollows' combined assault struck the ship, and their psychic attack was so powerful that the organic matter itself convulsed. Marcus felt the pressure like a physical weight, and it pushed against his resistance and tried to find cracks in his mental armor. He held firm, but he knew he could not protect the entire ship. They are breaking through. The Vethkai gasped. We cannot hold them. Then focus on the engines and get us moving toward that human colony. We cannot, and they will tear us apart before we clear their formation. Marcus looked around the bridge and saw the fear in the Vethkai's manifested faces, and he realized something important. These creatures had consumed his crew and turned his ship into a living nightmare, and they were monsters by any human definition, but they were also afraid and fighting for their survival, and in that moment they were no different from him. I have an idea, he said, but you are not going to like it. We are beyond preferences, and tell us. You can spread through organic matter, right? And you can move your consciousness through the ship. Yes, then spread into me. The silence that followed was absolute, and even the Hollow's assault seemed to pause as if the universe itself was shocked by his words. That is impossible, the Vethkai said. We cannot bond with you, and your resistance would destroy us. I am not talking about bonding, and I'm talking about something else, and you ride along in my mind, and I carry your consciousness with me, and my resistance protects you while you protect me. The pain would be. I do not care about pain, and can it work? The Vethkai collective conferred in ways Marcus could not perceive, and the walls rippled with their debate. It might work, they finally said, but the merging would change. You and you would carry pieces of us forever. Marcus thought about his crew, and how their memories now lived inside the Vethkai, and how in a twisted way they were still alive in there somewhere. Maybe he could carry them too. Do it, he said. The merging was agony beyond anything Marcus had ever experienced, and his resistance fought against the intrusion, but he forced himself to accept it. The Vethkai flowed into him like fire and ice combined, and their memories crashed through his mind, and he saw 1,000 worlds and 1,000,000 years of wandering between stars. He saw the first time they encountered the Hollow and the civilizations they had watched fall. He saw his own crew in their final moments, and he felt their fear and their confusion, and their hope that someone would survive, and he saw himself through alien eyes and a naked human stumbling out of a cryopod, and somehow becoming the most important being in the galaxy. The pain faded, and Marcus opened his eyes. He was changed. Vethkai collective existed inside him now, and their power merged with his resistance, and what had been a shield became a weapon beyond anything he had imagined. The Hollow felt the change, and their assault redoubled as they realized something terrible was happening. Marcus walked to the airlock and opened the door space stretched before him, and the Hollow fleet hung in the darkness like a forest of nightmares. He stepped out into the void. His resistance expanded around him and created a bubble of stable reality that let him breathe and move and survive. The Hollow screamed in fury and sent their warriors to destroy him. They came in waves, and each one was more terrible than the last, and they were creatures that had ended civilizations and consumed gods. Marcus met them with fists and fury. His blows carried the weight of every species the Hollow had destroyed, and his resistance burned like a sun against their darkness. The Vethkai inside him amplified his power and shared his pain. And together they became something neither had been alone. The battle raged across the hull of the Endurance, and Marcus fought until his body was broken and bleeding, and still he refused to follow. Hollow Commander approached, and it was vast and terrible in its form, contained multitudes of consumed minds. "You cannot win," it said, and its voice echoed with the screams of billions. "We are eternal, and you are one human with borrowed power." Marcus spat blood and raised his fists. "You are right," he said. "I am just one human, but let me tell you something about humans." He launched himself at the commander, and his resistance blazed brighter than ever. "We do not know when to quit." The impact shattered the Hollow Commander's physical form and sent shockwaves through the entire fleet. Marcus landed on the hull and collapsed, and his body was spent, and his mind was raw. But around him the Hollow were retreating. They fled back to their ships, and the ships fled back through the tears in space. And for the first time in galactic history, the Hollow had been routed by a single enemy. The Vethkai carried Marcus back inside and laid him on the organic floor of the bridge. "You did it," they whispered. "You actually did it," Marcus laughed. "And it hurt, and it was wonderful. We did it," he said. "All of us together." The Endurance began moving toward the human colony, and Marcus closed his eyes. Had won this battle, but the war was far from over, and the Hollow would return with greater numbers and deadlier tactics. But humanity would be ready, because now they knew what they were, and now they knew what they could don't. The galaxy would never be the same. The human colony of New Eden filled the view screen, and Marcus felt tears streaming down his face. After 7 years of frozen sleep and weeks of nightmare and a battle that should have killed him, he was finally looking at other humans. The colony was built into a massive asteroid that had been hollowed out and transformed into a fortress, and weapons platforms bristled from every surface, and patrol ships swarmed like protective insects. "They are hailing us," Mara said, and her voice was clearer now and almost back to normal. "They want to know who we are." Marcus moved to the communication console, and his body still ached from the battle, but he ignored the pain. "This is Marcus Cole of the research vessel Endurance, and I am a human, and I have information that will change everything." The response came after a long pause. "Endurance was lost 7 years ago, and how do we know you are who you claim to be?" Marcus smiled despite his exhaustion. "Check your records for Chief Engineer Marcus. Cole and I have a scar on my left hand from when I tried to repair a plasma conduit without proper gloves, and the captain made me buy drinks for the entire engineering crew as punishment." Another pause, and then a different voice came through, and it was warm and disbelieving. "Marcus, and oh my God, and we thought you were dead." "I thought I was dead too, and can we land? Get your ship in here right now." The Endurance descended into the asteroid's docking bay, and Marcus saw the reaction of the colonists as they watched the organic nightmare that had once been a human vessel. Armed guards surrounded the ship as it settled, and Marcus walked to the airlock. He looked back at the pulsing walls and the Vethkai faces that watched him. "Thank you," he said. "For everything, we should thank you," the Vethkai replied. "You saved us when you had every reason to let us die, and perhaps we judged your species too quickly. Perhaps we can learn from each other. Perhaps, and go now, and your people are waiting." Marcus stepped out of the airlock and onto solid ground for the first time in 7 years. The colonists stared at him and at the ship and at the strange glow that seemed to surround him. A woman pushed through the crowd, and Marcus recognized her immediately. It was Captain Sarah Chun, and she had been his superior officer and his friend, and she looked older now, but her eyes were the same. "Marcus," she said, and her voice cracked. "What happened to you?" He wanted to explain everything, and the Vethkai, and the Hollow, and the power inside him, and the war that was coming. Instead, he just said, "It is a long story, and we need to talk." The days that followed were a blur of meetings and explanations and tests. The colony's scientists examined Marcus and confirmed what the Vethkai had told him, and his DNA contained sequences that should not exist, and his brain chemistry was unlike anything they had ever seen. "You are right," the lead scientist said. "These genetic markers are in all of us, but they are dormant, and whatever that vaccine did to you activated them. Can you activate them in others?" The scientist hesitated and then smiled. "We think so, and it will take time. But if we can do it, then every human could have your abilities." Marcus felt hope bloom in his chest, and an army of humans with his power could stand against the Hollow, and maybe even defeat them. The colony leaders gathered to hear his full report, and he told them everything, and he held nothing back. He told them about the Vethkai, and how they had consumed the Endurance crew, and how they had become his allies. He told them about the Hollow and the threat they posed, and the civilizations they had destroyed, and he told them about the ancient engineers who had given humanity its hidden gifts. "We are not prey," he said. "We never were, and someone made us to fight back, and now we know how." The debate lasted for hours, and some wanted to attack the Vethkai and avenge the lost crew, and others wanted to hide and hope the Hollow would pass them by. Marcus listened to all of it, and then he stood. "I did not come here to argue, and I came here to offer a choice, and we can stay hidden and let the Hollow consume the galaxy one species at a time, or we can fight." "And if we fight and lose," someone asked, "then we lose as humans and on our feet, and not on our knees. But I do not think we will lose." He looked around the room at the faces of his species. "I was one man, and I was naked and alone and armed with nothing. But a wrench and I drove back a Hollow fleet, and imagine what we could do together." The vote was not unanimous, but it was decisive. Humanity would fight. In the months that followed, everything changed. The colony scientists developed a treatment that awakened the dormant resistance in human volunteers, and Marcus trained them as the Vethkai had trained him. Endurance was repaired and upgraded and renamed the Unity, and it became the flagship of a new human fleet. Other human colonies were contacted and given the choice, and most of them chose to join. And the Vethkai fulfilled their promise and shared the locations of survivor species across the galaxy, and some of them came to New Eden seeking alliance. Marcus stood before a council of species that had never worked together before, and he wore the uniform of a human admiral now, and the naked engineer who had stumbled out of a cryopod was gone. "The Hollow will return," he told the council. "They will come with more ships and more power, and they will try to finish what they started." "And what will we do?" an alien delegate asked. Marcus smiled, and it was the same stubborn smile he had worn when he first faced the Hollow alone. "We will show them what happens when the prey fights back." The Unity launched at the head of a fleet unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, and ships from a dozen species flew together toward the darkness. And in the depths of space, the Hollow gathered their forces and prepared for war. They had consumed countless civilizations, and they had ended species beyond counting, and they had never known defeat. But they had never faced humanity before, and humanity had spent millions of years waiting for this moment. The engineers who had made them had known this day would come, and they had given humanity everything it needed to survive now. It was time to use those gifts. Marcus Cole stood on the bridge of the Unity and looked at the stars. He had woken up naked and alone and afraid, and now he led an alliance that would determine the fate of the galaxy. "All ships," he said, "engage." The final battle for the future of all life had begun, and humanity would not lose.